They say money doesn't change people. It only shows who they really are. That night, under the glow of 1,000 chandeliers, a billionaire couple proved just how true that is. They arrived dressed like royalty, smiling for cameras, waving at strangers, toasting to charity and compassion. The kind of compassion that looks beautiful in photographs but disappears the moment the flash fades. And then they saw him, a homeless man standing just outside the ballroom doors. Wet coat, torn shoes, a cardboard sign that simply said, "Anything helps." He wasn't begging. He wasn't desperate. He just wanted warmth, somewhere to stand where the cold wouldn't bite through his bones. But to them, he wasn't a person. He was a prop, a spectacle, something to laugh at between sips of champagne. Victor Moreau, the billionaire husband, pointed him out first. He smirked, whispered something to his wife, and suddenly laughter rolled through the small crowd behind them. People who didn't even know what was funny started laughing too, because that's how power works. It teaches others to laugh at the same cruelty. Elena Moreau, elegant and merciless, stepped closer. She looked him up and down like he was a joke written for her amusement. And with a soft smile, she reached into her designer clutch, pulled out a crisp $10 bill, and tossed it toward his feet. "Buy yourself something nice," she said. Then she walked away, heels clicking against marble, laughter echoing behind her like applause. The man didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't even bend to pick it up right away. He just looked at them, calmly, quietly. And in that silence, there was something neither of them noticed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shame. It was knowing. Because while they were busy showing the world their power, they had no idea who they were laughing at. No idea that the man they mocked was already richer than both of them. Not just in spirit, but in truth, in silence, and in the kind of wealth no fortune can ever buy back. The moment they laughed at him was the moment their empire began to fall. The Moreaus were the kind of couple who thought reputation was a form of royalty. Every magazine called them the golden pair. Victor, a self-made billionaire who built empires on mergers and market timing. Elena, a woman polished by money until even her kindness gleamed like marble. Together, they hosted galas for the poor, fundraisers for the hungry, and photo sessions that looked like compassion. But only if you didn't look too long. They were adored by the same world. They quietly deceived. And in that world, image was everything. Every gesture, every smile, every speech was rehearsed like theater. Because to the Moreaus, perception was currency. And they were billionaires in both. That night's gala wasn't charity. It was business wrapped in kindness. Behind the speeches and applause, Victor was negotiating an acquisition deal worth $500 million. A deal that would expand their reach, silence competitors, and remind the city who truly ran it. He called it a new horizon. The irony was lost on him. Outside that same ballroom, the man they mocked, Daniel Reed, walked alone beneath the rain. His coat was thin, but his posture wasn't weak. Each step carried the weight of memory, the kind that doesn't break you, only sharpens you. Years ago, Daniel had been one of them, a visionary, an entrepreneur who built something from nothing. He'd founded a logistics company with nothing but a sketchbook, a small loan, and a belief that decency still had a place in business. He was right, until greed proved him wrong. His partners turned their backs, sold his company behind closed doors, and left him with nothing but a name that no longer belonged to him. That company's name? Horizon Logistics. The same company Victor Moreau was now preparing to buy. But Daniel didn't know that yet. All he knew was survival. All he knew was how to stay standing when the world wanted him on his knees. He found shelter in community centers, purpose in small kindnesses, and peace in being unseen. Every morning, he still read the financial pages at the library, tracing the world he once belonged to with quiet curiosity. Not envy, not bitterness, just observation. He didn't chase revenge. He didn't need to, because time has a strange way of bringing people back to the same crossroads. The powerful on one side and the forgotten on the other. And when that day comes, only one question matters. Who learned from the fall? And who never believed they could? While Victor and Elena smiled for cameras, Daniel helped a stranger fold his blanket at the shelter. He gave away the same $10 bill they'd thrown at him, pressing it into the palm of a young mother who hadn't eaten in 2 days. It was a small gesture, quiet, simple, human, and yet it carried more grace than every speech given inside that ballroom combined. Later that night, the world began to notice. Someone had recorded the Moreau's laughter, the mockery, the arrogance, the $10 cruelty, and posted it online. At first, it was just noise, a few disgusted comments, a ripple of outrage. But then it spread. By morning, millions had seen it. The perfect couple, the philanthropic pair, exposed for what they truly were. Victor dismissed it as gossip. Elena laughed it off, saying people forget fast. But Daniel didn't. He understood what the world had just handed him. Not vengeance, but timing. Because sometimes the universe doesn't punish cruelty with thunder. Sometimes it simply waits and lets the cruel bury themselves one decision at a time. By the next evening, the laughter had followed Daniel everywhere. Every step he took seemed to echo with it, not from his memory, but from 1,000 strangers' phones. The clip had gone viral. 10 seconds of arrogance replayed millions of times. Victor and Elena Moreau, the city's favorite billionaires, now famous for all the wrong reasons. The world loves its heroes, but it loves its villains even more, especially when they fall wearing diamonds. Daniel saw none of it as revenge. He watched it unfold with quiet disbelief, as though the world had taken the pain he swallowed and turned it into a headline. He didn't celebrate. He didn't share. He simply watched and waited, because he understood something they didn't. Noise fades, but truth doesn't. Inside the Moreau's mansion, the laughter had stopped. What had been a home of open doors and lavish dinners became a fortress of silence. Investors began to hesitate. Business partners canceled meetings. Public relations firms scrambled for words to polish what could no longer shine. Victor called it a temporary inconvenience. Elena called it a misunderstanding. But the world called it what it was, cruelty captured. For a while, they tried to buy their way out. Apologies were drafted, press statements rehearsed, sympathy donated. Yet the stain didn't wash out, because the internet has a memory sharper than guilt. And while Victor and Elena tried to protect their image, Daniel simply kept living. Each morning he still walked to the shelter, poured coffee for the volunteers, folded blankets for strangers, and when people recognized him from the viral clip, he smiled and said, "Don't worry about that. I've had worse weather." That humility, quiet, unbothered, began to spread too. Someone interviewed him for a small local paper. A single quote stood out. "It's easy to mock a man when he's down, but you never know who's watching you from the ground." Within days, that quote was everywhere. Printed, posted, shared. It was as if the world had been waiting for someone to say it out loud. Meanwhile, Victor grew restless. He couldn't understand why a man like Daniel mattered. "He's nobody," he told Elena. "A drifter. A prop for outrage." But Elena wasn't so sure. She noticed how his name started to appear in places it shouldn't. Financial forums, articles about ethics in business, quiet mentions from people who spoke like they knew him. It unnerved her, because people like Daniel weren't supposed to have a following. Then came the board meeting. Horizon Logistics, the deal they'd spent months securing, was finally on the table. Victor had arranged everything. Investors, media, government contacts, all ready to witness the moment he would expand his empire. He told himself that once the ink dried, everything would return to normal. Scandals fade when there's money to be made. But the meeting didn't begin the way he expected. The company's legal advisor entered with hesitation. "The acquisition documents are ready," he said carefully, "but there's been a new development with one of the shareholders." Victor waved him off. "Minor paperwork. Proceed." The lawyer didn't move. He cleared his throat and added, "It's not minor, sir. The largest shareholder has changed." Victor frowned. Changed? To who? The room fell silent. No one wanted to say it. So, the lawyer simply placed a folder in front of him. Inside was a single name typed neatly in black ink, Daniel Reed. For a long moment, Victor said nothing. He thought it was a mistake, maybe a prank. But it wasn't. Behind the scenes, Daniel's old company, the one stolen from him years ago, had quietly reinstated him as a primary shareholder after a legal review of its founding documents. The same company now holding the key to Victor's billion-dollar deal. Daniel hadn't lifted a finger. He didn't need to. The world had simply come full circle. That night, as the news reached him at the shelter, he sat for a long while in silence. Not shocked, not triumphant, just still. He had spent years losing everything, and now, without effort, he had become the single thread that could unravel the empire of the people who mocked him. Sometimes life doesn't demand your anger. Sometimes it only asks for your patience. And so Daniel waited. While Victor prepared his press statements and Elena rehearsed her public smile, Daniel prepared nothing at all. He didn't need to, because the truth, like the tide, doesn't rush. It simply returns when it's time. In every story of arrogance, there comes a moment when silence begins to speak louder than applause. For Victor and Elena Moreau, that moment began quietly, with an email they weren't supposed to see. It came early one morning, marked confidential. A board member had forwarded an internal message by accident. It contained only one sentence. Majority shareholder, Daniel Reed, approved for attendance. Elena read it twice before showing it to Victor. For the first time in years, neither of them spoke. They just stared at that name, the same name that had haunted every headline, every comment section, every echo of their public disgrace. Daniel Reed, the man they laughed at, the man they called trash, the man who had walked away that night without a word. And now he owned them. Victor tried to hide his panic under reason. "It's impossible," he muttered. "He's homeless, a nobody. He doesn't have the means." But money isn't the only kind of power that exists. And that was something Victor never learned. Over the next few days, everything began to shift. The investors who once chased Victor's handshake now delayed their calls. Emails stopped coming. Elena's social invitations disappeared overnight. Their empire, still standing, began to tilt, just enough for them to feel it. And somewhere across the city, Daniel Reed sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, reading the morning paper. He wore the same jacket, the same calm expression. Beside his cup was a folded letter from Horizon Logistics, the official confirmation of his reinstatement as a major shareholder. He had signed it 3 days ago. No lawyers, no fanfare, just a pen, a steady hand, and a small note attached beneath his signature. Let the past find its own way home. He didn't want revenge. He wanted truth. Because revenge ends when one man wins. But truth? Truth keeps going. It rewrites everything. Soon, a journalist reached out to Daniel, the same one who had covered the viral clip. She wanted to do a follow-up story. "People want to know what happened to you," she said. Daniel smiled and replied, "Nothing happened to me. The world just started watching." The interview never aired as planned, because what came next didn't need a broadcast. It would unfold in real time, in front of the very people who once laughed at him. The day of the acquisition meeting arrived. The conference hall was filled with polished shoes, designer suits, and strained smiles. Victor and Elena entered first, confident but uneasy, their public masks cracking around the edges. They were told a new investor would be attending, one whose approval was essential to finalizing the deal. They expected some faceless executive, another billionaire, to charm. What they got was silence. When the doors opened, Daniel Reed walked in. No entourage, no announcement, just the quiet weight of presence. The room stilled. The air seemed to draw in on itself. Victor froze, his hands still mid-gesture. Elena blinked, almost unable to process what she was seeing. The man in front of them looked nothing like the figure they remembered from the rain. And yet, it was unmistakably him. Same eyes, same calm, same dignity they mistook for weakness. Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply nodded, pulled out a chair, and sat down at the head of the table. And when he spoke, his voice was soft, steady, unshaken. "Let's begin." The meeting continued, but every sentence now carried a quiet tremor. Every time Daniel turned a page, Victor's pulse quickened. Every nod, every glance, reminded them of what they'd once believed. That power meant never having to look down. Now they sat looking up. When the meeting ended, Daniel rose slowly and gathered his papers. No one dared to stop him. He turned toward the couple who once humiliated him and said, "Do you remember what you told me that night?" Elena's lips parted, but no sound came. Daniel smiled faintly. "Buy yourself something nice." He paused. "Don't worry, I already did." And with that, he left. Outside, the sky began to rain again. Softly this time, as if the world itself was trying to wash something clean. That moment was more than irony. It was alignment, the kind that only truth can create when time, chance, and consequence all arrive at the same door. For years, Daniel Reed had lived unseen. And now, without raising his voice or lifting a hand, the world finally saw him, not as a victim, not as a beggar, but as the quiet storm that wealth never saw coming. Because dignity doesn't shout. It waits. And when it finally speaks, the whole room listens. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from realization. The moment people understand that the story they've written for themselves is no longer true. That's the silence that filled the Moreau's mansion in the days after the meeting. Their empire didn't fall overnight. It trembled first, quietly, invisibly, like a ship taking on water. Investors began to withdraw. Partnerships paused. Rumors spread through the markets, subtle but sharp. It wasn't just about the viral clip anymore. It was about the name attached to it, Daniel Reed. The man they had mocked was now at the center of their business. And worse, he wasn't saying a word. He didn't call for attention. He didn't post statements or interviews. He simply existed, calm, unbothered, and powerful enough to make silence his weapon. Victor tried to fight it. He called board meetings, summoned legal teams, demanded answers. He said Daniel's name with contempt, as if saying it softer could make it smaller. But every time he spoke it, it carried more weight. Every attempt to control the damage only drew more light. Every word made the story louder. Meanwhile, Daniel met privately with the board. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't mention the humiliation. He talked about accountability, transparency, ethics, words that had long been missing from the company's vocabulary. And the board listened, not because of who he was now, but because of what he'd endured. He had become something Victor never understood. Credible through integrity, not status. By the end of that week, the board voted. Daniel Reed was to assume controlling interest of Horizon Logistics. Victor Moreau was to step down effective immediately. When the announcement hit the press, the city erupted. Headlines spread like wildfire. Homeless man becomes majority owner in billion-dollar company. The Moreau Empire crumbles after hidden truth revealed. Daniel Reed, The Quiet Storm. Elena sat in her glass office, staring at the phone as it lit up with calls she would never answer. Her reflection in the screen didn't look like wealth anymore. It looked like consequence. Victor raged. He smashed a glass, shouted at the world that had once bowed to him. But the world didn't listen this time. It was too busy watching the man they once ignored, the man who had waited in the rain. Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't seek the spotlight. When reporters found him, he spoke softly. I didn't take anything from them. They gave it away, piece by piece, every time they forgot what respect was worth. That quote alone reshaped everything. It turned the narrative from revenge to reflection. The Moreaus became a cautionary tale. Daniel became a lesson. The company they had tried to own was reborn under his direction, not as an empire of greed, but as a foundation for fairness. He reinstated the workers Victor had underpaid. He restructured the charities the couple had used as tax shields. And the very gala that had once humiliated him, he revived it under a new name, the Dignity Fund. A real charity, for real people. No cameras, no applause, just action. When Victor and Elena were asked for comment, they declined. Their lawyers released a brief statement calling the situation regrettable. But regret is a currency the world rarely accepts once the debt is due. One evening, months later, Daniel stood outside that same hotel where it all began. The same marble floors, the same golden doors, but this time no red carpet, no flashbulbs, only the sound of rain on glass. He watched it fall, quiet, steady, relentless. And as he turned to leave, a reporter approached him and asked, Mr. Reed, what does it feel like to take down a billionaire empire? Daniel paused. Then he smiled. I didn't take it down, he said. They built it on sand. I just waited for the tide. When power collapses, it doesn't make a sound right away. It fades slowly, painfully, like a chandelier dimming until only the dust remembers the light. In the weeks that followed, the Moreaus disappeared from the headlines they once lived for. Their social accounts went silent. Their names, once printed in gold, were replaced by stories of investigations, board resignations, and seized assets. Their empire hadn't just fallen. It had been erased by the same arrogance that built it. And yet, Daniel Reed didn't celebrate. He didn't raise a glass, or stand on a stage, or look back with triumph. He simply went home. Not to a mansion or a penthouse, but to a modest apartment overlooking the same city that once turned its back on him. The walls were bare, but they were his. The silence was heavy, but it was honest. Every morning, he woke before dawn and walked the streets in peace. He saw the same alleys he once slept in, the same benches that had known his loneliness, and the same shelter that had offered him warmth when the world offered nothing else. Only now, those shelters had new signs on the doors. The Second Chance Foundation. He had funded them quietly, using his own shares from the company he now controlled. No press, no cameras, just hope for people the world refused to see. Sometimes he'd sit among them unannounced, handing out coffee or blankets, and not one person would know who he really was. And that, to him, was the point. Because power means nothing if it demands recognition. Real change is silent, and it works without applause. Across the city, the news cycle had moved on. The Moreaus' assets were frozen, their partners gone. Some called it karma. Daniel didn't. He called it consequence, the kind you earn when you mistake privilege for purpose. Months later, a journalist found him again. She asked if he had any regrets. Daniel thought for a moment and said softly, No, because everything I lost taught me what to value, and everything they had taught me what not to become. She smiled, thanked him, and left. But the world didn't stop talking. Because stories like his don't end when the screen fades to black. They linger. In headlines, in hearts, in quiet moments when people realize what dignity truly looks like. That night, Daniel sat by his window, watching the rain trace the same glass towers that once looked untouchable. He remembered the sound of laughter, the cruelty that tried to break him, and realized it no longer hurt. It was just noise now, and noise always fades. What stays is character. What lasts is grace. He took a slow breath, closed his notebook, and whispered to himself, I didn't win. I just remembered who I was. And somewhere, far from the noise of the city, the rain kept falling, steady, patient, cleansing, as if the sky itself understood that justice doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a man walking home, free at last, in the rain. In the end, it wasn't about wealth. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about the fall of a powerful couple who mistook privilege for purpose. It was about something quieter, something most people forget until life forces them to remember. Dignity. That word had followed Daniel through every storm, every empty night, every insult that tried to define him. He learned that you don't lose dignity when people laugh at you. You lose it when you start believing that laughter means anything. And that's something Victor and Elena Moreau never understood. They had money but not respect. They had status but not peace. They had everything to be admired for, except the one thing that makes admiration last. Daniel never needed their apology. He didn't need headlines or justice served cold. He didn't want to destroy them. He wanted to remind the world of something simple, that how you treat the powerless says everything about the power you hold. The Moreaus forgot that truth. Daniel lived by it. And that's why when the tide finally came, it carried them out to sea. But it left him standing. He once thought he'd lost everything. But standing there, years later, in the same rain that once soaked his hands, he realized he hadn't lost it all. He had gained clarity. He had found peace in the one kind of wealth that no market crash could erase. Character. So ask yourself this, when your moment comes, when no one's watching, when the world has nothing to give you and everything to take, who will you be? The one who laughs at another's pain? Or the one who stands silently and lets the truth do the talking? Because justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives softly, in worn shoes and a quiet heart, teaching the proud what humility costs, and reminding the humble what grace is worth. So maybe this wasn't a story of revenge at all. Maybe it was redemption, not for the cruel, but for everyone who's ever been told they were less than they are. Because Daniel Reed didn't rise to prove them wrong. He rose to prove himself right. And that's the kind of victory that never fades. If this story moved you tonight, if it reminded you that no empire is stronger than integrity, and no heart richer than kindness, then share it. Let someone else remember. Because in a world obsessed with power, it only takes one act of dignity to remind us what being human really means. And so, as the rain washed the city clean, one truth remained. You can strip a man of everything he owns, but you can't take away who he is. Daniel Reed never shouted for justice. He simply became it. And in a world that worships wealth and forgets worth, he reminded us all that grace is louder than greed, and dignity will always outlive gold. If this story touched you tonight, take a moment, not to pity Daniel Reed, but to remember what he stood for. Because somewhere out there, someone's fighting a quiet battle the world doesn't see. Someone's being mocked, doubted, dismissed. And maybe, just maybe, they're not falling. They're becoming. If his story reminded you that no amount of money can buy integrity, that no empire can stand taller than humility, then carry that with you. Let it change how you look at the people the world overlooks. Because every time dignity rises, in even the smallest of ways, the world shifts, just a little. If you felt that tonight, don't let it end here. Share the story. Leave a word for someone who might need to hear it. And subscribe for more stories where truth stands taller than power. And humanity always has the final word.